Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher live show. I'm your host, Shannon Crow, and I'm excited to be talking to you today about the anatomy of the bony pelvis. And the reason I'm really excited is, one, I love anatomy, but I also really love how, as a yoga teacher, as soon as I bring this awareness to people, it starts to enable communication about pelvic health. It changes perspective on body image and acceptance and how we move. And it's just really fun to know this is the way the body is made up. So I'll share some of the common things that students say to me, as well as some questions and some cool notes as we go. Because I think anatomy should be really fun, and I think sometimes maybe different education systems that we've been involved in, it can get a little bit dry, or we think it's dry. So I'll do my best to keep it fun. For those of you who are watching the replay, if you can post your comments and your questions, that would be amazing. And we'll get started. So also a thank you and a shout out to those of you who tuned in for the podcast launch party. It was a lot of fun to do that. There is a replay video. I will tell you that it's very long, and so I would understand if you don't want to go and watch an hour of the party. Some of the balloons are still up in the background here from the party. Okay, so getting into the bony pelvis, we're going to first start with the sits bones. So come to sitting on a chair and come to sit near the front of the chair. And if you can bend the knees and bring the knees up a little bit higher, you will be able to start to find the sits bones. So the sits bones are also called the Ischial Tuberosities. And we're going to get into why they're called that in a moment. So wiggle a little bit side to side on your sits bones from sitting. And it helps if you scooch closer to the edge of the chair, you might be able to feel your sits bones a little bit more. And I'll also be showing everything on the bony pelvis that I have here today. So the ischial tuberosities are at the very bottom of the pelvis. And they're called tuberosities because they're the little protrusions. So we'll get into that in a minute with the bones, but find your sits bones. You can even feel around for your sits bones. This is the point where yoga students a lot of the time will say, well, you know, my glute muscles are too big, or they might make comments about their body. So already we can start to invite in, like, we're all shaped differently, and can we find the sits bones, because we're going to come into a little bit more of an awareness with them in terms of how they move. So if you're at sitting, I'd like you to move to standing and see if you can then find the sits bones. So it's going to require a little digging around in the glute muscles, and you might want to watch if there's people around you and you're on your lunch break. This might not be the time to do that. Yay, Roslyn, so great to see you here live. If anyone else is here live, please type a little comment. I'd like to be able to give you a little shout out, a little hello. Also, if you have questions as we go, type them in and I'll do my best to answer them. So when you come to standing and you're feeling for the sits bones, then I'd like you to also move then from, if it's available in your own body today, you can start to move from standing to squat or stand to sit, and see if you can hold on to your two sits bones. There are the two sits bones. So I'm going to face this pelvis. This pelvis is pretty cool because it has pelvic floor. It's a female pelvis as well. And so you're going to hold on to them, and you're going to see what happens when you move from squat to stand. I can't really show you here with this pelvis, but see what you find. Hi, Carissa. Great to see you tuning in here from Lucknow. And so as yoga teachers, I know that there's 2 yoga teachers already tuning in. It's great to do this. I get students to do this, everyone doing it in class, to find the sits bones and to move from stand to sit or to squat. And the biggest thing that we can offer students here is to tell them that this really helps with elimination. It also helps with birthing. So Elimination is an everyday thing, or should be, when we have good pelvic health, and squats will help with digestion and elimination. So if you were sitting on a chair and you put something underneath your feet and raised your feet up into more of a squat, so for those students who can't squat, sorry, you can bring them into a sit and then raise their feet up so that they're kind of in this squat, or do a squat from ball. On my Shannon Crow Yoga Facebook page, I did a short video on the different variations of squatting. Hi Vicky, great to see you here. Great to have you here on your lunch break. Yeah, so you can find that over Shannon Crow Yoga. I'll try and post a link here in the comments as well, so that you can see some different modifications of squat. So when we go through this, it's important to empower your students to say, you know, this is why squatting is important to do. The recommendation is 1 to 3 minutes of squatting a day, and especially for women who are giving birth. Now, there are some contraindications for squatting, and I share that as well in that squatting video. Okay, I think we're going to move on if everyone has found their ischial tuberosities or your sits bones. We'll move on to the bottom of the hip bones. So you're already there when you're feeling the ischial tuberosities, and you've found then your ischium. And it might be hard to find the rest of the ischium, but you can kind of move around, see if you can feel the bony structure. So this part, this bottom part of the pelvis, is called the ischium, right here. And this is where it gets sometimes a little bit confusing. So hold on to that for a second, because you might be like, I want to know where the line is. We like to be really definitive sometimes, and anatomy gets tricky that way. Then we're going to find the top of the pelvis, and I love doing this with students in class. So feel for your waist, and then feel around for the very top of your hip bone. You can do it on both sides. You might want to come to stand for this, and see if you can kind of trace along the top of that ilium. And that's your iliac crest that you're feeling, the very top of it there. So I love when students feel for this bone and then they're like, wow, that's the top of my pelvis? I never knew that. So it's fun. I take this in with me. I'm going to try and find a link for you guys for a pelvis like this. If anyone knows of one, I ordered mine online. If you know of one, you can send it to me or post it in the comments. So this, but I'm going to try and find one and put it in our article for this week. Okay, so this top of the pelvis is called the ilium. So we've done the ischium is the bottom, the ilium is the top, and then, oh yeah, I want to get into one point with the ilium. So if you're at standing or sitting, I want you to find the top of your ilium and then feel for your rib cage. So feel for the ribs. Now between the ribs and the ilium, I want you to measure the space of that. So where your ribs are and where your ilium is, the iliac crest, the top of the hip bone. This might be easier at standing, but you can do it from sitting as well. Now imagine we're going to just lean over to the side for a moment. And do you see that the bone hits the bone there at some point? Now some people have really long space in there, and their side bend will be way over to the side. But for someone who has a shorter measurement between there, I'm just going to see if I can show you, because mine is very short. It's about that big between my ribs and my hip bone. So my side bend, I really have to think about lengthening through the other side, which is nice anyway. But I also know from that awareness that my side bend is not going to be like someone who has a bigger space there. So this is where we can start to invite in that conversation with yoga students, like, we're all built the same, and yet we're so uniquely different. Like, we all have the rib cage there, and we all have the top of the hip bone, the ilium, but it's gonna, that bone on bone, we can't go further than that. So that's great information to share with our students. Okay, so the hip bone, this whole bone here, so if we look from here all the way up to the top, the iliac crest, We're going to come around. We already talked about the ischium, the bottom of the pelvis, and then we come around to the front, and we're going to find the pubic bone, or the pubis. And I want you to just imagine for a moment, if you have the printed diagram, it might be a little bit easier to look at that as well, and I will post a link for that as well in our notes, our comments. And it'll all be on the Connected Yoga Teacher page under the videos, the live show videos. Okay, so this whole bone, this hip bone, also called the os coxa, that's another name for the hip bone, is in those three different parts when we're born. So when we're babies, it's in those three separate parts, and then as we grow up and become adults, then it fuses together. And so this is where some of the confusion might come in when we're naming the different parts. And we think, well, it's one bone, why don't we just call it one thing? But people who love anatomy love to find different names. So sometimes you'll look at an anatomy diagram, you think, wow, I can't learn all those names. But it's fun to start with the basics and then go from there. So if you look on the diagram that I'm going to send to you guys, number 7 is the Obturator Foramen, and that basically means that it's whole in there. So that's what it's called. We don't have to remember that, but it's fun to know, okay, well that's what, when there's that space and there's that hole, that's what it's called. What are we going to go into next? I want to make sure, oh yeah, so the different parts of that. So the crest, often, this is where anatomy gets easier as you go. So the crest is usually that outer edge, the tuberosity is something that protrudes, so you can start to put it together where something is. The pubis bone, easy to think of because we know where our pubic area is, or our pubic hair grows. So this is the pubic bone. And it's fused together at the front by cartilage. So it's usually quite sensitive. This is why when we play hockey or sports, we usually have some sort of protection there for it. Okay. So now we've done all of the major bones of the hip bones, all of the major parts. So we've done the hip bones, and we've covered that. Now we're going to start to get into... Oh yeah, I want to do the pubic symphysis because it's on yours. So that is just where the pubic bones meet. That's the pubic symphysis. I'm looking over at my notes and they're way over on the wall here. Oh yeah, next thing that we're going to do is the coccyx, or the tailbone. So we've found all of those parts of the hip bone on ourselves. Now, if you're not sure where your tailbone is, you can reach down, follow the spine, trace it all the way down to the tailbone. You can see where the tailbone is here on this pelvis. Can you see it? That it's above the anus. So the tailbone goes down there. And one really cool thing about the tailbone, or the coccyx, is that it moves in childbirth. So just this information alone helps women to know, okay, if I'm birthing, I don't want to be lying on my back because the pressure on that from lying down is going to work against. So you get a woman either on all fours so that the tailbone can move up, or if she's wanting to lie on her back, then you prop things up so that the tailbone has space to move. So you can prop up with pillows, or you bring a woman to lie on her side so that that tailbone can move. So you can see how this empowers us. So sometimes women will say that they have a lot of pain after childbirth in their tailbone. Sometimes it moves out of place. Sometimes it'll move out of place if we've had a bad fall. So it's worth going to a pelvic floor physio if you have pain in your tailbone. Some chiropractors, some pelvic floor physios will adjust it and put it back in place. So I think you need to go to a pelvic floor physio to do that, but it's worth looking into that because if the tailbone is out of place, it will be very painful. Okay, so above the tailbone, the coccyx, we're going to feel around for the sacrum. So I'm going to show you the sacrum here first. Trying to get the best lighting. So you can see how it's this big mass of fused bones, and it's at the end of our spinal column. So the spinal column is sitting up here, and here is the sacrum. So we're going to feel around for the sacrum next. We'll come to standing, or from sitting, you start to feel where, if you wore a belt, where would that be? And then come into a little gentle forward fold. So either with the knees, I like to bend the knees and forward fold, otherwise it can actually pull a little bit too much. Yeah, that is another topic for another day. Okay, so with the knees bent, we're going to just lean forward and see if you can dig in a little bit here. So we're going to see if we can find the SI joint, or the sacroiliac joint. So when we know already, this is the iliac crest, this is the ilium, and the SI joint is where the sacrum meets the ilium. So sacroiliac joint. So it becomes easier to find these spots because of that. One thing to really note about the sacrum is that this pelvis is held together with little screws here, but otherwise it's a little bit, it will move a little bit. So there is a joint. I wonder if I can show you. So if you see where the sacrum is here, and you see the iliac crest, then you can see how this is just attached by cartilage here, and that it's attached also, can you see? There's a little line here where you'll see that there's muscles and tendons around it. These you can see on here. And so if we're doing a lot of asymmetrical movements with our students or just in our own practice, this might feel painful or might come out of place. Now, one thing to really tell students is that the pelvis is so incredibly stable. And this is why I like to take this one around, pass it around to people. This one's actually smaller than the life-size pelvis. And so you let students know that it's really stable. It's not going to just come apart. It's held together really well. But if something shifts just a little bit, people can experience some pelvic girdle pain. In a video that I'm going to do a little bit later on today on my Shannon Crow Yoga page, I'm going to talk about that instability. So if you're curious about that and you want to find out what can I do for students to keep their pelvis a little more stable, or to do some strengthening around there as well as stretching, I'm going to take you through a sequence on that. Oh yeah, we're going to also cover the acetabulum. So this little spot right here is where the head of the femur goes. So I have a video as well to kind of show where the femur goes. So the head of the femur is the top of the leg bone, and it goes in that space. So you can see how stable it is in there. The shoulder joint is not like that, but that's why we can do quite a bit of stretching in the hips and to bring some relief or bring mobility in there. If you bend your knee and you start to move your knee around, you're moving the head of the femur around in that acetabulum. So it's fun to get students to do that, to bring some mobility in there as well. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm going to check that I got all of my notes. I'm going to put links to that. And so this information, again, just gives us something to talk to students about. We don't have to have the pelvis to bring with us. I'm going to share a link to this page that has all of the bones that we covered. I actually made this up for the Mama Nurture course. The diagrams used with permission from Grey's Anatomy. I think they have something that you can use their photos as long as you give them what's it called? The word's gone from me. Credit. As long as you give them credit. So I'll definitely put that so that you guys can get that, a link to that. And it's fun. I make copies for my students when I take that around and we go through it, and I'm like, can you guys guess what that is? Like when we feel it first, it's fun to kind of make this into a game. And usually they learn a lot of stuff about the pelvis. Don't worry if you feel like, oh, I can't get the names right in this video. I hope that I've gotten the names right for you guys, but there's lots of other online videos as well. And also know that different anatomy experts argue about what things are called. They change the name, and don't feel bad if you're behind on and you're calling something of an older name. Just understand that that's part of it as well. So next week we're actually going to do an introduction to pelvic health yoga. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the pelvic floor. So that's the muscles down there and how that works and how we can start to bring that into our yoga classes. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. If you guys have questions about it, I would love to hear them. This is also a lot of the time when I go to work with students who have mobility issues or low back pain or such a variance of things, basically anything in the trunk of the body going on. When we start to look at pelvic health, it can really affect positive change quickly for students. I think that's it. This week on the podcast, we're going to have a teacher talking about trauma training in yoga teacher training, or what all yoga teachers basically need to know in terms of trauma training. So that's really exciting. Margaret Howard's going to come on and talk to us. So that'll be released this Saturday. And oh yes, I wanted to ask you guys, and those who are here live, or if you're watching the replay, can you please let me know if there is a topic that you would like for a future live video? Because we've done January, February, March. I'm just putting together the April schedule right now, so I would love to know, and I might even start to put into May our schedule to get that up and on the website, and to see what you guys would like to hear about as yoga teachers. It can be any topic that you're facing as a yoga teacher or within your own yoga practice, so let me know. Also, make sure to put your name in for the prizes. The draw will happen on our live show next week, so I'm excited about that. You can go to the connectedyogateacher.com page and enter into the draw to win the book, The A to Z of Being a Successful Yoga Teacher by Erin Aquin. Or there are other prizes, and if you go to the podcast page, then you're going to see all of the different prizes. So some of you have already emailed to let me know what prize jars you want to go into, and I've got my little pen here with all my little papers, and I'm putting those in as I get them. So thank you guys. Okay, have a wonderful week. I would love to hear if you use some of this information with your yoga students, and I will get this all together. My plan is to have it on the website today, video and everything. I've already got the post ready to go. Okay, talk to you soon, but guys, bye. Bye, Rosalind. Thanks for tuning in. Rosalind, Carissa, Vicky, take care.